Hello and welcome to Curtis Stage Tutorials. This tutorial is part one of a series on CSS, and so this is beginning CSS, and we're going to look at kind of the basic elements of what makes CSS work. So over here I've got what CSS is. It's cascading style sheet, and the cascading is a key word, but the style is the most important one. Style then tells us kind of what CSS does. It affects color, text, size, and position in your document. And there's three ways to put CSS, kind of involve it within your HTML page. One is inline, and it's not a way that I really like, and that mixes kind of your HTML and your CSS together, and that's not a good way to write CSS code. The next way is embedded, and that would be specific to the document you're working on. So if you embed CSS, which we're going to have going on today, that's only in that document that you're working on. And it's located in the head of the HTML tags. If we're talking about external CSS, what that is you apply a separate style sheet to your HTML page and you can connect it to it. And what's great about external is that you can have more than one page linked to that CSS sheet, and that one CSS sheet can affect the style of multiple pages within your site. So let's say you want to change the color of text on 50 pages. Well, that would be a pain in the butt to go to all 50 pages and change the color of text. But an external CSS style sheet you'd be able to do it one time and it would affect all 50 pages. So that's what the external is. Now the main part of CSS we're going to look at is, let's just look a little bit about kind of how it's structured. This is how CSS is structured. Essentially, you'll see this is the code, but I put some stuff around this so we can kind of see what's going on in here, but I can take all that off so we can kind of see what's happening. And so what we have right here is a basic CSS code here. We've got this is a heading tag, and so a heading element, and essentially I would be saying, hey, any heading element on the page, please turn the color red. Simple enough. So let's look at what some of these things are. So a selector is the actual tag that you're selecting. So the actual element that you're selecting is a selector. So that's a good name for it. You want to select the heading tag or the heading element, and you want to do stuff to it. So that's why it's called a selector. In between these curly brackets is the declaration of the selector. So in between those curly brackets, we've got the declaration. So that is telling the selector what's going to happen. Okay, inside that declaration, we've got the property. The property is, of course, something like color. It's saying, hey, with this selector, change its color. And then obviously, the thing that's on the right here would then be the value of. So the value of this property then is red. So we've got a selector. Inside the selector curly brackets are the declaration. So those curly brackets are the declaration. And inside that declaration, there's a property and a value. So four things that make up the structure of the CSS code. I'm in Dreamweaver, and you can see that I've got different possibilities here on my page. It's written a little differently than what you saw before, but let's look at this a little closely. So here I've got a specific kind of a selector. This one right here is a P selector. It's similar to the H1. So what this is doing is this selector is saying select any element that's on the page. So there's ways to choose selectors. There's ways to kind of like say, hey selector, I want you to do something. I want you to have a certain style to it. So there's 5 ways to do that. And the first one is the element. So selecting the element, which in this case would be the P for paragraph, you'd say, okay, for any P on the page, change its font to Arial. And you can see how I've got the curly brackets here after that are the declaration. We've got the property and then the value. So the property is font and the value is Arial. Let's look at the next possible way to have a selector or to choose a selector, and that would be class. So here you can see that I made up a class name, and a lot of times with classes you're making up the name, whereas with an element you're taking an existing tag. I mean, a P is an existing HTML tag, so that would be any element that exists in HTML. With a class, you could do that, but you could also, there's existing classes that already exist within CSS, but you could make up your own classes, and that's what I did here. I made one called class name. So with class name, it looks almost exactly the same as this P up here, but there's a big difference between this element, which would be everything on the page, and this one, which is a class. So a class, what it tells CSS is, it says you could apply this to any object on your page. You could use it more than once. You could use it to large groups of objects, but it doesn't have to be everything on the page like the one above it. So with a class, you can apply that selector to multiple objects on the page. The next one, of course, is an ID. Okay, and so an ID, and I just kind of call this a div. The class is a div as well, and from here on out I'm going to be calling these boxes. So because they hold stuff, and CSS and web in general is about box making. Everything that we do in HTML, in CSS, is making boxes, and we're going to put design in those boxes. So essentially this class could be a box, and this ID could be a box. So the difference between a class and an ID visually is an ID has a number sign and a class has a period right there. So you can see that I've got an ID here, and I'm going to call this div ID div name. So it's different than this one a little bit, except, just right here. Everything else is the same. They're all written the same here. So this ID div name I made up, and I'm saying, hey, have a margin left of 0. Now what's the difference between a class and a div? Well, a class applies to groups of objects, but an ID applies to one unique object. So an ID is always unique, and a class is always about groups. So I'm going to skip position in document. We'll talk about that later. I'm going to go to Pseudoclass, the fifth way to select an object on your page. We'll come back to the position in document. Pseudoclass is like combining these top two. It's like combining a class with a regular element. So you can see here I've got an anchor plus a link and telling that what to look like. Okay, so that's a pseudoclass. It's like combining the two. It's very similar to position in document right above it, so I kind of skipped down one here. I went to pseudoclass first. Position in document says, hey, if you have one object, but inside that object you have another object, and you want that object to be specific, you want something to occur within that object. So in this one, it's in position in document, any P that would occur inside div name, I would have the text decoration of none. But any other P's in the document may have text decoration. So any P outside of div name could have text decoration, which would mean like an underline. But any P inside div name would not have one. So that's position within the document. So that's the fourth way to choose a selector within CSS. All right, let's look a little bit now at design. Okay, you'll notice that I have two boxes here on my page. I have one box that's a white box, and that is my class container. You can see in my CSS styles panel that I have a bunch of elements here, and one of them is container, and that's a selector. And then one of them, of course, is content, and that is also a selector. So that's these two boxes. Okay, I'm going to double click on selector and choose it, and let's see how we got it green and this size, because it just didn't happen like that. So if I double click on it, and in the CSS styles panel I can double click any one of these selectors and it'll open up its rules box, and then I can start adding rules to it right here. You can see that I could add type rules to it and background, and that's how I changed this one green. So I went to the background category and I went to green, and I'm going to change it to gray right now and click apply, and you'll notice that it turned gray. You'll also notice that I have different areas here. I'm going to go to the box area, and this is where I put the height and width of this content box. So this class content is a box, and so I'm going to change its height and width to 500 by 300. So it's inside the container, and it's got a smaller width and height than the container. The container is the white box. The content is the gray box. All right. Let's put another box inside this box so we can kind of get a handle on how we make divs, how we make these boxes, and I'm going to make a div right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here and I'm going to go to my layout tab, And if you don't know how to get here, you can go to right up here on the top application bar, you can go to classic mode, and it will give you a layout so that you can have the layout panel right there. And then in that layout panel, you'll see that you have a little button here that you can say Insert Div Tag. I'm going to go to Design View, and I'm going to click inside the gray box because I want this div to go inside. So I want one box inside another, nested. So I'm going to click this Insert Div Tag, and you'll notice that it gives me the option right here of where to insert it. Before or after the tag, or at the insertion point. I'm going to put it right at that insertion point where my cursor was. And you'll also notice that it gives me a choice between a class and ID. Of course, class is group, ID would be singular. I'm going to make it singular. So I'm going to title this one Box 1. And instead of clicking OK here, I want to actually start giving this some rule definitions so I can see the box right off the bat. So I'm going to click here. This box that comes up, the next panel that comes up, I'm just going to click OK. This is just solidifying for me. Dreamweaver saying, are you sure you want to make an ID or do you want to make a class? What do you want to make? So I do want to make an ID here, so I'm going to click OK. And then I get my rules definition box that I was just in for my content box, but now I'm in it for my box 1. And over here I've got my categories. I'm going to go to background and give this background color, let's say green, and click apply, and I won't see anything yet. I don't want to click OK because I want to keep adding to this object. So I clicked apply instead. Next I want to go to the category of box and define a width and height. So maybe I'll make this box small. I'll make it 75 by 75. And you'll notice when I do that and click OK and click OK to this, I've now got a box on my screen. Dreamweaver puts this text in here for me just to let me know that I've got an ID here. But there I go. I've got a green box now on my screen. So I have an ID called Box 1 sitting inside content. So let's look over here. In my CSS Styles panel, it conveniently created a selector for me called Box 1. And in my code, I can look at that as well. Let's look at that code. Right here, in my body of my document, this is where the actual objects exist and they cascade from top to bottom. We'll talk about this more in part 2 of this tutorial, but they go in order here. There's a cascading order, like a waterfall. So it starts with the container, which is the white box, right, the white box here, and then it goes to the content, which is the gray box, and then it goes to the box 1, which is the green box, and they're all in order here cascading down. Now I'm going to delete this here so you can kind of see this a little bit more clearly. Box 1 that I just created is nested inside the content box, and the content box is nested inside the container, and visually that is the case. Gray inside white and green inside gray. But also in the code that's the case. Look right up here where it says div class equals container. That's where it starts right here, and this is where it ends right down here. And then that holds the content, which ends there and starts there. And that holds the div ID box, which starts here and ends right there. And anything that I put inside box would happen in between these two alligator brackets. So if I put in some text in here, that's going to show up in my box back here in Design View. Look at that. Hi there. And any images I put in here. So all your content for your div or your ID would go right in between those two brackets. So again, I'll just put hi there in there so we can see it. And then I go to Design View, and there it is. Okay, so let's do a little bit more to this green box here. Let's move it around, because that's one great thing about CSS, that it's not just about style in terms of color, it's also about positioning. So I'm going to go over here to my CSS Styles panel, and I'm going to go to Box 1, that's the div ID I made, and I'm going to go here, and I'm going to get the rule definition over for it. I'm going to go to the category box again. And that's where we put our height and width of 75. And you'll notice we've got a padding and margin. Padding is on the inside of the box. So if I uncheck this and I give it a padding of left of, let's say, 5 and hit apply, you'll see that my text moves over. But you'll also notice the box grew bigger as well. Let me do that again. I'm going to add 10. And you'll notice the box grows bigger. That's because the padding has to accommodate for that extra pixels, so it'll increase my width from 75 to 85, so I have to add 10. So it actually keeps the content area within this box 75 and adds the 10 to the outside of the content area. Okay, so that padding's on the inside of the box, but it adds the area in there and expands the box by 10. Now my margin is the outside of the box, so I'm going to uncheck Save for All, and I'm going to take the margin of this green box and push it off to the left right here by saying, let's say 25 pixels right there, and click Apply, and look how it moved off the left-hand side of the content box that it's sitting in. And I can even move it down off the top here by going to the top, and I could say move down off there 25, and then it moves down. Pretty nice. And when I'm doing all this stuff, all that code is happening for me behind the scenes. Back here in Code View, let's look at my box. There it is. And look at all that code that's happening. All the declarations for this selector, here's the selector, all the declarations are happening between the two brackets. And they can either be, like this, where it's kind of easy to see, stacked up like this, or it can either be that or a straight line across like I showed you earlier. It works either way when you make the code. So I like it like this, for it's easy for us to see. So look at that. It shows me my background color that I picked. It shows me my height, my width, my padding on the left, my margin on the left, and my margin on the top. And the reason I love CSS boxes, I call them supercells, because as opposed to table cells, they're much, much better because I can affect all around the box individually. So on this one, in this case, I affected the margin left. And in a table, I can't do something like that. In a table with a table cell, I can't just affect the left-hand side. I would get all clunky by adding another table cell and keeping it invisible or putting a spacer in there. And that's not an efficient way to code. So most designers have moved away from tables in HTML coding and gone to CSS because it's so much easier to affect your objects, and you can affect all the way around them. Okay, so you can see that when I write this code, there's the property of background color, and there's the value, and you notice that in between is right there I've got a colon, so the colon's almost like an equal sign, and then to end this line of code with the CSS I've got the semicolon. So that's important. That's exactly how you'd write CSS, and it never changes. That's exactly it. Most of the time. I can't say it never changes, but for the most part that's what it's like. In fact, CSS is the easiest code to understand and write. All right, so this is how we kind of move stuff around within boxes. Let me go back to box 1 just one more time to the rules definition. I can move it around here in rules definition, or I can move it around in code view. So if I wanted to add margin to the left of, let's say, 50, I could add it right here in code view and go back to my design, and it moved over 50 pixels. I don't have to double click over here in CSS styles and open up the rule definition box. I could actually, when I get used to CSS code, just do it right there in the code, which is nice. Okay, so that concludes part 1 of CSS within HTML, working with HTML within Dreamweaver. The next tutorial will be part 2. We'll move on a little bit more detail in moving these boxes around and manipulating them a little bit more, and we'll start talking about what's called floats and the flow of the document in part 2. All right, thanks so much.